Our next speaker is going to be Bruce Clark from the Marler Clark, the food safety law firm, and his presentation is on foodborne and environmental illness litigation, lessons from the front line.
Mr. Clark has an extensive background in civil litigation, including personal injury, product liability, and professional malpractice actions. Mr. Clark did defense work at the Seattle firm Carr, Tuttle, Campbell for nearly 15 years before he joined his present partners in a practice devoted to representing injured persons.
Perfect. I'll hand it over to you, Mr. Clark.
All righty. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, it's a great honor to be here with you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. And we're going to run through a bunch of stuff, some of which I hope you find interesting, some of which you may not. But it will certainly reveal the intersection of our law practice and public health, because we can't do what we do without public health. And in my long career, now stretching almost 40 years, 30 years of food and environmental health litigation, I've seen a lot of things. And so we're going to talk about some of that stuff. And hopefully I'll be able to share my screen here.
You should be able to. Oh, there you go. You got it.
Am I on it? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Yeah, you can see how technologically sophisticated I am. As it is in most of life, the things you end up doing are not the result of your own choices. Instead, they're the result of contingencies you can neither foresee nor control. So it was with me as a lawyer. In 1993, I was working in Seattle doing defense work for a firm. That firm worked for one of the insurers for a corporation called Foodmaker that we know today as Jack in the Box. And in 1993, starting in January of that year, the news here would be dominated by a weird, rare outbreak of illness related to eating hamburgers at Jack in the Box. I had never heard of E. coli, much less E. coli 0157H7. But when our firm was retained by Foodmaker's insurer, that would introduce me to a whole new world. I would go on to litigate cases against Jack in the Box for almost 5 years, hundreds of cases up and down the West Coast. And then I would join my current partner, Bill Marler, who represented a lot of kids in that outbreak, to form our own firm, Marler Clark, largely focused on foodborne illness. And I've been doing that ever since. So I hope these slides advance. Hang on. So there we are. If you guys want information, I'm not patting myself on the back or tooting horns here, but our law firm is a good portal to an enormous amount of public health information surrounding enteric pathogens and environmental pathogens and basic science. So you know you're old when you realize the world is fundamentally different than when you were a kid. My kids are 29 and 24, and they grew up in an entirely different world than I did. I know that. So, for instance, when I was a kid growing up, the only thing people said when they got sick was, they had the stomach flu. Someone might say, oh, I think I had food poisoning. But what was that? Nobody knew anything. There were no biofire assays for enteric pathogens. Nobody had ever heard of E. coli, much less Salmonella or Campylobacter or Vibrio. It was just a big unknown. Nobody had heard of norovirus. I love a good graphic. This one is a winner. This is one reason I'm not going on one of those giant cruise ships. We do some norovirus litigation, and I gotta say most of those cases seem to arise from wedding receptions. So forewarned is forearmed.
Really quick, Bruce. It looks like
Yep.
you're displaying like the presenter mode that would show like your presenter notes and stuff. Is there
Oh,
a way that you can maybe change the display settings so that we can see the
how do I do that? Oh, here we go. How's that?
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. So Jack in the Box comes along and everything changes, really changes. So by way of analogy, when I started as a lawyer in 1984, personal computers were just beginning to be used in offices. When I was a young lawyer, to produce a document, I used a dictaphone to dictate it to a secretary who would type it up. And in the early years of personal computers, you spent a lot of time staring at the swirly thing as it was frozen. This, despite the fact that I grew up only a few blocks from Bill Gates, who went to a private school with one of my older brothers, and they actually carpooled together. I can tell you, Bill Gates as a kid was just as geeky as you might have thought. And in fact, did spend all his time in the computer lab of that school, but he did okay. Jack in the Box fundamentally changed the way that we surveil for foodborne illness. So, for the first time, we actually understand what is going on. A couple of things that happened in Washington state that made the Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak particularly interesting was that Washington state, I think, was the first state just before this outbreak to make E. coli a reportable illness. One of the ways that we know what kind of illnesses are making people sick. And the other remarkable fact, although it wouldn't have changed the outcome, but it sure didn't help Jack in the Box, was the year before 1992, Washington State changed its food code to add the requirement that ground beef had to be cooked to 165 degrees internal temp. I think it was the first state to do that. And that was born out of the knowledge that in 1982, our country's first reported E. coli outbreak had happened at a quick service restaurant I won't mention, but it has golden arches. And that one came and went, and that company sat on that information. It never really got out there, but it wasn't until 1982 that medical science understood a relationship between E. coli and HUS, the really severe complication of an E. coli infection, the hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is the leading cause of acute renal failure among children in the United States still today. So we think we know everything, but as we're going to learn, knowledge is always coming, and you have to constantly be acquiring it if you're going to keep up. So we do a lot of litigation, more than any other law firm in the country, but we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg. You can see the numbers are just breathtaking. But one of the realities is that as surveillance tools get better, we learn more, we find more, and we will continue to have litigation grow, I think, around foodborne pathogens. I knew absolutely nothing about this area when I started defending Jack in the Box, but I got an unbelievable education over the next years, which continues today through hundreds of public health professionals, academics, medical doctors. Learned a lot about epidemiology and medicine, which I really enjoy. Those are probably my favorite things. So I would become acquainted with Jon Snow. No, this is not the guy from Game of Thrones. My girlfriend and I were on vacation in Croatia, where you may know they film Game of Thrones. And we were at some of those sites, and one of our guides said that Game of Thrones was responsible for basically doubling American tourism to Croatia. So if you're into Game of Thrones, go to Croatia. So you can't get a tip like that from any other lawyer. Snow was a remarkable guy. He was an anesthesiologist. In fact, he was one of the guys who pioneered the use of chloroform in childbirth. He actually delivered, I think, the last couple of Queen Victoria's children. And he became fascinated with understanding the outbreaks of disease, notably cholera, that plagued London in the middle of the 19th century. So famously in 1984, there was a giant cholera outbreak, and Snow, among other things, was carefully plotting the location of the cases. And what he discovered was they all were in geographic proximity to a particular public source of water, the famous Broad Street well. And the story goes, which is sort of true, they removed the pump handle and the cholera outbreak died out. Actually, I think it was already dying out. But Snow demonstrated this approach to studying disease in a population that we know today as epidemiology. I was like, my favorite Snow anecdotes is that when he was doing his plotting of case locations in the outbreak, he found a brewery near the Broad Street well where there were hundreds of workers, but no deaths and very few cases, which he found very puzzling. But upon further investigation, he found that the brewery had its own well because they needed a lot of water. And secondly, that workers who work there got to drink the product they were making in lieu of water. So that has always led me to observe that when in doubt, go with your alcoholic beverages if you want to be safe, sort of. So today we spend a lot of time with epidemiology because, as we're going to see, the ongoing challenge in litigation around these illnesses is finding the source. I really miss Carl Sagan. We need more guys like him, just good people, warm hearts, really smart. But I'm all about the science, unlike, say, certain former presidents. I think it's got to keep learning, and it drives everything that we do, and it's constantly changing the way we do things. Oh, I just was flashed by, I don't know how to go back. Oh, wait. So this is some of the changes. I don't know whether some of you are old enough to appreciate this, that on the heels of Jack in the Box, we got PulseNet, the CDC's monitoring tool for genetic data related to enteric and other pathogens. And CDC library has grown like Topsy over the decades. It's extraordinary the amount of illness outbreaks that are now identified at all levels. All of it funnels up to CDC. And so when we have an outbreak, one of the questions we always have is, how common is that strain of salmonella? Has it been seen before? Is it seen in relationship with certain kinds of food, et cetera, et cetera? The sort of basic science that helps us to figure out what we need to know in cases. I put together this slide, and apologies for any weird formatting. I mean, if you're going to ask me to do a PowerPoint, good luck. But I read a paper on van Leeuwenhoek, who was a Dutch scientist, amateur scientist, who really changed the way the world looks at things, because he was a master at developing magnifying lenses that led to the development of microscopes, and was literally one of the first people who was able to look at and realize that there were microorganisms moving around in all kinds of stuff. And initially, people thought he was just BSing, this couldn't be true, but he became a sensation. People would make appointments to come and look through his lens and see, what was in a drop of pond water. That opened up a whole door. Think about that. You don't know it's there, and then it's there. And by the time John Snow was investigating cholera, they still didn't understand that microorganisms were the source of these huge illness outbreaks. The prevailing theory was it was sort of in the air, this miasma disease that would settle over a house. But the German scientist Robert Koch in 1876 shows definitively that anthrax could make animals and humans sick. Now we're really moving along. Now we have a line from microorganisms to human health that didn't exist before. I'm not giving you a science lesson. I'm just pointing out how quickly things go. Um, pulse field gel electrophoresis arrives in the 1990s. If you're as old as I am, you probably watched the O.J. Simpson trial. You may recall the incredible brouhaha around the prosecution trying to explain and use PFGE results of Simpson's blood to show definitively that he was the murderer. And it was just this, whoa, this is too far out there, novel. It was derided as, made up science. Now it's became a standard and now has already been bypassed by whole genome sequencing, which is what we see in outbreaks all the time. And speaking of WGS, look at that. It spent 2 decades sequencing the first human genome, and that cost about $1 billion. Today, I think you can send a sample of your own DNA off to some company for a few $100, and you can have your DNA sequenced. That's how fast it goes. And now we're coming to AI, and God knows where that'll lead us. One of the things I hope it leads us to is better traceback. That's remains an enduring problem in a lot of outbreaks, especially involving produce, is trying to figure out where was this grown down to the field. It also has big implications for recalling contaminated food products, but I'm sure AI will be used in all kinds of manners to assist in disease investigation. So let's get to the lawyer stuff. I don't know whether you can read this caption. I love this as a New Yorker. The lawyer is saying, my fees are quite high, and yet you say you have little money. I think I'm seeing a conflict of interest here. I love a good lawyer joke. We certainly deserve it. And you, by the way, are getting this free lawyerly advice. So it's almost a unique experience. But we're not just working to get money for our clients, though we are doing that. We're trying to advance the ball to answer questions about what the hell happened, which is the first thing that clients want to know when they get sick. What do I work on? What do we work on here? Well, it sort of tracks with the most burdensome enteric pathogens in the United States per CDC. The big ones are, of course, Salmonella, which remains an enduring problem despite interdictive measures. Certainly, if you know something about commercial poultry, I just don't like big chicken growers. Shiga toxin producing E. coli or S-tech is a big deal for us. Listeria is, a ubiquitous pathogen in the environment. Doesn't make healthy people sick generally, but if you're elderly, immune compromised, or pregnant, it can have devastating consequences because it can cross the blood-brain barrier or the placental barrier and induce profound bacterial meningitis. It kills a lot of people. We have a lot of death cases. We have cases right now here in Washington that arise from a local drive-in fast food place in Tacoma, Washington, south of Seattle, that was an LM outbreak linked to milkshakes. The tubing in the milkshake machine was colonized with listeria because they didn't properly sanitize it, and they ended up killing 3 people and making a bunch of other people sick. So Hep A, a lot of food worker Hep A drives us, and then a potpourri of other pathogens, Campylobacter, norovirus, we talked about, bot. I don't see a lot of botulism in the United States. I did that in California. There was a creamy cheese food outbreak, gas station. You get your nachos or something. You have the machine that spits out that yellow goo contaminated with botulism. The problem was the machine, the maintenance and storage of the material killed a guy, bad outcomes. And we had another case in California that was home canned tomato sauce sold at a roadside stand. 2 women who were roommates consumed that in a shared meal. One was in the ER with creeping paralysis. The doctors had no idea what was going on. Botulism's hard to diagnose. And then her roommate came in with the same problem, and they deduced it was botulism and figured out it was this product sold at a roadside stand. Legionnaire's disease, I didn't know till I got into my word that Legionella is very common in modern plumbing. It's just waiting for my moment. And we have some parasites like crypto and cyclospora that contaminate. Raspberries seem to be a popular thing. Or these things turn up in recreational water, which is one of the big environmental exposures that we have along with animals. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. We're going to see later on the consequences of this, but I would say all of these illnesses, the average illness is pretty significant. And when you consider that a lot of these illnesses are incurred by persons who already have pre-existing health burdens, you get a lot of bad outcomes. Maybe not permanent bad outcomes, but acutely bad outcomes. People are hospitalized. Obviously, medical bills in our country is a huge burden. There are a lot of complications that come with these, and a lot of people that have these enteric illnesses say that's the sickest I've been in my life. So I tell you that the things you do to prevent any of these common illnesses is incredibly important. I remember as a young lawyer defending Jack in the Box cases, hearing a woman say that her abdominal pain was worse than childbirth. The first time I heard that, sort of internally rolled my eyes like, oh boy, she's kind of gilding the lily. But I'll tell you, the 10th or 15th or 20th or 50th time I heard those same words, I understood that this was kind of pain I wasn't familiar with and sure as hell did not want to be familiar with, because these illnesses are really nasty. So what do we do here? We get cases singly in clusters or very large outbreak cases. We always go to local public health with freedom of information requests immediately. I know some of you there may be familiar with our requests. It is burdensome. We appreciate it. But public health efforts are the most important thing that we have. That's the first thing I want to know. If I were talking to a client and they were describing an illness, I want to know, was it reported? Did you have contact with local public health around it? Because that's going to be ultimately the best source of information about what happened and what was the source of the illness. We work with experts. We work with everybody. We work with people who are active, for instance, certain epidemiologists with state public health departments, because some of them are fantastic. Academics, scientists, internationally. Again, this is sort of my mantra, the more you know, the better. So I seek out opportunities to learn more from people. And the wonderful thing, especially in the public health world, is people want to help. They know the consequences. They have their hand out. We work with a lot of former CDC people. You can't work with, people employed by CDC currently, former FDA, USDA people. And it's terrific. And we need those people, but we can't do anything without public health information. Usually, if we're looking at a prospective case and the answer is no, I had no public health contact, then we're not taking that case, because what are you going to do? You can make an argument, but you're not going to meet your burden. So we can look at how and why we do that. We always ask for, you can ask for your own client's records, and except in certain states where bizarrely you can't get any information. In other words, a client cannot ask for their own records pertaining to a public illness. Not true in Arizona or Washington State, happily. We want outbreak records if there is a, and certainly, depending on the setting, we want inspection reports. really important. Sometimes it turns the tide, and we want trace back because, as we're going to see in litigation, you sue everybody, and the people you don't sue or the companies you don't sue are going to get sued by the companies you did sue. So here's an example. If you're wondering, like, how does this actually play out? Here's how it plays out. This is a case I had a few years ago. This is a group of family members from Calgary, Canada. They have a big family vacation to Oahu. They stay in Honolulu where the grandparents have a place. The grandkids stay with the grandparents. The parents are elsewhere. And during the course of roughly a week or so, they're moving around Honolulu and environs, doing different things, eating different things. But along the way, the two kids are going to get very sick. They're going to be hospitalized in Honolulu, which with what is confirmed to be an E. coli 157 infection. Other family members get sick, parents get sick, but not nearly as sick. And the big question is, where did this come from? What's the evidence that we have? Well, there are no other cases. We always ask for that. Anything else that matches PulseNet, nothing. No positive environmental samples anywhere to be had. They had lots of food exposures, as you can imagine, but we could only find one meal where they clearly all sat down at the same place at the same time and ate. And that meal caught the attention of local public health on Oahu. And so it went to investigate this restaurant because obviously the case histories indicate shared food at this one place. So they went out to see what was going on. And let's see what those sanitarians found. This was interesting because we got to depose all these people. Oops, hang on. These are verbatim comments from inspection reports of this particular restaurant. The red highlighted ones, the storage of food, protein above vegetables and fruits, I thought was particularly important because the family didn't all eat the same food items at this meal. So we're thinking about cross-contamination opportunities, and they were absolutely there, as was temperature abuse, as you see. I sort of love that last one. You think about, well, what can I tell a jury about this place? Well, they make your food on the floor in the kitchen. Not so good. So what are some of the things we also learned when we deposed the principals? We learned that a lot of the kitchen staff did not speak English at all. It wasn't simply ESL. They had almost no English. Therefore, when we ask about training of staff, the owner was pretty squirrely about it, but acknowledged, it's really hard to convey that information. We also found in other inspection reports of this place that the problems were recurrent. Although they would have red items flagged for correction, they would be corrected, but it would creep back. I remember one of the most telling things from the owner of the restaurant about the recurrent problems was along the lines of, well, you can tell your employees what to do, but they may not necessarily do it. Well, I think that's obviously a problem of communication. I think public health here did a remarkable job because without, this isn't conclusive of anything. Everyone would agree it's a post facto snapshot in time. But where you can show recurrent problems in a suspect restaurant or similar facility, then you've gone a huge way towards meeting your burden of proof in court, which means the defendant really has nowhere to go. So it was in this case. The defense lawyer, I think, made a fundamental mistake in deciding ultimately to depose the epidemiologist, state epidemiologist in Hawaii about this outbreak. And she ultimately simply said, I think it was probably the restaurant. And you know what? We win. We resolve the case because it's very, very difficult to refute public health in front of a jury because I think jurors appreciate that public health doesn't have, a dog in the fight. They're just there to get the information. And when you have something like this, where problems are carefully documented, it's sort of golden, as it were. Of course, you can always argue about anything. So here's an example of an outbreak that I had about a decade ago. This was obviously a Mexican restaurant. The case control study indicated that contaminated lettuce was the probable source of this outbreak. And the traceback went back to a particular field in California where you could see where it was grown. And incredibly or not, the field was sandwiched between a commercial composting facility and a wastewater management facility. Hey, what could go wrong? The defense spent, I know this because I talked to the attorney about it, they hired an epidemiologist to rebut the findings of Maricopa County Public Health and spent more than $150,000 on that person to develop a giant phone book size report of BS. So we won. And we won because Maricopa County did all the heavy lifting, basically. And, you learn something, I hope, from all those outbreaks that will prevent another outbreak. I'm just going to whip through this. If you're curious, if you're planning to go to law school in your next career, strict product liability boils down to the fact that if you make a product that is injurious because it's not reasonably safe, you're liable, period. End of discussion. Negligence is irrelevant. We don't care what you did. We only look at the product and say, is it safe or unsafe? When it's a food product that contains, Listeria or Campylobacter or Salmonella, it's not safe. So we're going to win on that. Why do we have strict liability? Well, the ones who can prevent the contamination are the manufacturers, and the ones who can afford to bear the burden of loss are the manufacturers and sellers, not the customers. And the focus is on the product, not the conduct. And why do we do all this? Because for me, causation is always the big issue. What everyone disputes, if I wish I had a nickel for every business entity, particularly restaurants, you say, well, I think you're the source of the problem. And invariably the response is, well, we've never had a problem before. And I always say to them, well, you've never had a problem you're aware of. Just because we haven't found it before doesn't mean you didn't have a problem here. I have to prove my case more probably than not, a little over 50%. So we don't deal with p-values or 95% confidence intervals. We're just trying to tip the scales a little bit. And so it's important to understand that we don't need certainty, we need probability in what I do. We're going to slide into oh yeah, this is a real drill down here. I was just reading that there is an outbreak of STEC in Tennessee related to a school field trip where they went to a live animal exhibit. And I was emailed the lawyers here and said, boy, I think I've seen this before. Have I ever? Over and over and over. And it's extraordinary because it's 2023. The same outbreak keeps happening. And this is the outbreak. This isn't the outbreak I'm talking about, but it's the identical outbreak. You can see, and we'll drill down and show the difference that public health could make. So it's remarkable to me that people who display animals in a public setting don't avail themselves of the extraordinary efforts of public health, because you've got this state public health veterinarians association. Hundreds of people have spent decades putting together the compendium, which is a how-to manual lessening risks to the public when they come into contact with animals. I mean, it has everything in it: the history, the pathogens, how you direct traffic, what signage, how you deal with hand washing. It's all there. It's available online. You can find it in an instant. but too many of these entities that do this never avail themselves of the readily available information. So we get to this. This is from the compendium because it has a long compendium of outbreaks related to animals in a public setting. In 2015, there was an 0157 outbreak at a dairy event in Washington. And that's what I want to talk about because I litigated that outbreak. It was in a county that abuts Canada in northwestern Washington, fairly rural, very heavy dairy industry there, stretching back many generations. And it's an important part of the economy, understandably, and the community. One of the things they did up there for, gosh, I don't know, a couple decades was they had something called the Milk Makers Fest. This was for private and public school children to go to the local fairgrounds to learn about the dairy industry, and they had interactive stuff and rides, and you got snacks, and it's all swell. And the idea of it, I thought, was fine, but let's look at the execution of it. We're talking about school-age children going on a field trip, so the parents get notified of the field trip. That information contained nothing about any conceivable risk to the children of the environment that they're heading into. What was that environment? This is from the outbreak report. So I think a week or 10 days before this event, in the same venue, live animals were displayed, basically a sort of 4-H event, cows, calves, other ruminants. The group that put it on was told by the fairground owner, we can clean up for a fee or you can clean up for free. So they said, well, we'll take care of it. And how'd they do that? Well, they scraped up, mounds of cow manure and hay and whatnot and piled it up, and then used leaf blowers to make sure that any potential pathogens were atomized and sent to settle all over this interior venue. And later environmental sampling would show that it was contamination from this event that would show up in the children of the milk makers fest. So the kids came into this place. This is the barn. This was the ground zero. So we're looking down at an area at the end there where cattle and ruminants were displayed. And as we'll see, there's a hay maze the kids were thoroughly exposed to on the heels of the prior thing. There was no sanitizer used for any purpose cleaning up from the prior event. Their bleachers, you can see here, one of the very first cases, oddly, wasn't a school kid, it was a high school kid, didn't attend the fest. So how'd that happen? Well, he attended the local high school where they had an ag class you could do. That high school had a barn and a teacher, and they showed, you'd learn about animal husbandry and etc. Interestingly, we deposed that guy. He said one of his rules for the school barn was no eating in the barn. Makes complete sense. So what happens? He recruits high school kids to help set up the hay maze for this event. And they're in the space you're looking at, building the hay maze, after which they sit down and that teacher, the no eating in my barn teacher, produces a box of donuts. My first client eats the donuts and will end up in the hospital as a result. There was no hand sanitizer offered. There were no operable hand washing stations at that time. It's off season for the fair. Not a word is spoken by anybody about the potential for any risk. These are the kids. This hay maze is built literally on the spot where animals were being displayed in that prior event. So they're going over what was heaps of cow manure that had been raked up and then blown around. It's a little pathogen maze. You can see here, this was their idea of warning sign, which says basically something about there can be bacteria. You shouldn't put your hands in your mouth. Do you think these kids are reading that or interested in that? I don't think so. That was their preventative measure. And we would get some profoundly ill kids out of this outbreak. I was in Arizona giving a talk last week. I happened to meet up with the mother of one of the outbreak victims who was an infant. It was a secondary case from his sister who attended the fest. He had profound HUS and suffered permanent renal damage. He's older now, he's not yet 10. He takes blood pressure medicine every day. And our forecast is that he will reach end-stage renal disease, kidney failure, requiring a transplant in young adulthood. This was an entirely preventable outbreak. That's what I'm saying, because the fundamental problem about hand washing was this. We deposed all the teachers in this. It was fascinating because one of the first grade teachers said in her class before lunch in the school, the kids had to line up and wash their hands with soap and water under her eye. And they would sing the birthday song twice to get, 20 seconds of scrubbing in. Take the same person, the same kids to this event, and this is hand washing. So we're going to see, this is a tanker truck with a pipe on the back, and little spigots attached out of which cold water dribbles. In theory, the adults here are putting a dollop of some kind of soap in the kids' hands, and then they're going to go up and wash their hands and dry them off. I love this shot. So you can see a woman in the background handing out paper towels, I guess, to dry. So this is entirely predictable. These are little kids, and they're it's rainy, it's wet, the water's splashing on your feet. Are you going to get into that cold water and do anything? No, you're going to stick your fingertips in and sort of shake it off and say, I'm good. Why is this? It's this way because the years and years and years of this event, at no point, not once, was there any intersection between the event organizers and local public health. There wasn't a single person involved in the fest who knew what the compendium was. The principal at the fairgrounds knew damn well what the compendium was. He'd had a granddaughter who'd suffered an STEC infection. He understood the importance of hand washing and portable hand washing stations for the fair. No discussion with the people putting on this event ever about this. No reach out to public health. This is just what drives me nuts. No input from public health. Can you imagine if a sanitarian had been asked, hey, would you come out and just check out our facilities? We have a lot of little kids here. We want to make sure that they're healthy and safe. And you're looking at this as the hand washing solution. What do you think they'd say after commenting, are you shitting me? This is your hand washing solution? That's not going to work. And this just breaks my heart because it happens over and it's always the same things. No, we didn't know about the compendium. No, we never talked to public health about anything. This is what should happen. This is the same location. This is the fairground, the summer after, a few months after the outbreak I've been talking about. This guy is a local county public health sanitarian, and let's see what he's doing. I hope I cue this up so you can hear this video clip. If not, I'll just give you the skinny.
To get from some surface that you touch into your mouth, germs have to hitchhike on your hands. And what we want to do is we want to remove those hitchhiking germs from your hands. Hand washing is really the way to go. Since germs hitchhike, it's important to try to limit as much as possible while you're in animal exhibits, eliminate hand-to-mouth activities. So don't put chewing gum in your mouth. Don't put lip gloss or chapstick on while you're in an animal exhibit. We want to capture everything from wrists to fingers, get between hands, get under your ring, get your fingertips, and lather up.
That is fantastic work, in my opinion. I can't think of anything more important than what you just saw. He is explaining hand washing, he's explaining the risks of animal exhibits. He's not doing that to the general public. He was doing that to a group of hand washing ambassadors who had been hired on site to go around and encourage people to hand wash and show them how to use the fleet of new state-of-the-art portable hand washing stations that the fair installed after this outbreak. It's like everything else in our country, you know, there's lots of post-incident remediation action, not much on the prevention side. This outbreak, many millions of dollars changed hands and payments and medical care costs and attorney costs. It would dwarf the budget of the entire county public health system for years. And yet that outreach never happened. If this guy had been there before the Milk Makers Fest in the year in question, that outbreak wouldn't have happened. And so I leave you with the thought that to the extent that you can convey the information you had to vulnerable audiences, that's incredibly important, as we're going to see in a moment as I wind up. And I understand, believe me, I understand the burdens that public health is underfunded and underappreciated. And be glad you're in Arizona, because we litigate around the country. And I'm sure you'll be shocked to know that most of the robust state public health and local public health entities are in blue or purple states, and not so much in red states, where they don't have the resources to do much of anything. We have a big water park outbreak in Mississippi. And Mississippi's code regulating recreational water, zero, nothing, nada. There's no regulation, no inspection, no nothing, which is why when I'm deposing the head of water safety at this place, she gives answers like, I can't tell you how chlorine works. I don't know what oxygen reduction potential is. I've never heard of cryptosporidia. I don't know what breakpoint chlorination is, and so on and so on. Public health can change that, and you guys can change that. And I applaud you for your efforts, because this is the ugly reality. Oops, I'm going forward. Hang on. This is a client of mine. You know, I could talk all day, but sometimes just seeing is better. I was thinking about, I took driver's ed when I was 16 on Bainbridge Island across from Seattle. It was a sleepy island, 2-lane roads. It was a chill place to take driver's ed. You could drive all day and never see another car. But at the end of our class, they showed us a movie. And I'm sure they don't do this today because kids are too tender. But the movie was the aftermath of horrific car and truck accidents. And it was the real deal. It was a collage of, you know, decapitated people, limbless, burnt to a crisp. And, you know, I don't remember much about that class. I remember the movie. So bear with me as we look at this young guy. He was an STEC victim, common food product. Here he's in the PICU. He's got hemolytic uremic syndrome. He's in acute renal failure. This is him days later. You see the massive chest bruising. That's because he has undergone CPR after he arrested in the PICU. They just were able to get him back, and he was put on ECMO, which is a machine, basically does your heart-lung machine to keep you alive for profoundly ill people. Very tenuous here, whether he's going to survive. There he is in ECMO, and he would spend more than 4 months in the hospital. That's his 11th birthday. You can imagine what it's like being the parents, family members, when this is your child. just fighting for life here. Oh yeah, he had colectomy. One common complication, severely ill people, a little bit of large intestine or bowel becomes necrotic, can rupture. If you don't operate emergently, that patient will die very quickly. So they went in to remove at least a chunk of his large intestine, but he was so edematous, common finding in HOS patients, they couldn't close his belly. He had to come back from the OR, leave this open until they could literally compress the skin together to close. He's in the hospital so long, that's his head, that's a scalp bed sore. He developed cervical subluxation during his many months of being in a hospital bed, and so he wore this collar to help straighten his cervical spine. You can see his abdominal surgical scar under the tape there. This guy was a really remarkable kid. He had remarkable parents, and he survived. I'm going to go back and show this family. They were incredible people. He will experience kidney failure ahead. He'll require one or more transplants. The half-life of a cadaveric kidney currently in the United States is about 15 years, assuming everything goes well. It is sort of a miracle organ transplant. With kidneys, they're not going to last forever. And almost all those people will have hugely shortened life expectancies. They have enormously increased rates of cancer due to immunosuppressive drugs. And in the end, most of them die of cardiac events. And his medical bills were north of $1.5 million, and his future meds were pegged at, more than $10 million. That was a kid. If you spent your entire year of whatever it is you're doing, and you may think that it's not very important or sort of ministerial or it's ho-hum, but if you prevent one case, not even a case like that, prevent one of these serious illness cases, you are a hero. You're my hero. It makes an enormous amount of difference. Not just the money, which is obviously a big deal, but the ripples of these things are incredible. They rip through the lives of the patients. They rip through the lives of these families. Nothing is ever the same. It's never as good as it was. The emotional damage is terrible. The physical damage is terrible. So I want you to, pat yourselves on the back, know that you are appreciated, that the fundamental work you do, it's not about helping me prove cases, it's about preventing cases. And you've seen from the numbers of food and environmental illness cases we have every year in this country, there's a huge amount of work to be done. So I commend you and I appreciate you. Keep learning, keep plugging away. And we do a lot of litigation around lettuce, and it is a weird thing to think that the risks are ever shifting, but it's the information piece. And I always close with the same thing, not just because of that Milk Makers Fest case, but one of the enduring problems across decades of doing this is hand washing is always an issue. It's always lurking there. There's not enough training, enforcement of hand washing. God, we would all be a lot better off, pandemic or not, if everyone just washed the hell out of their hands once in a while. So I always try to give a little plug for hand washing. I love it. That's it, guys. I delivered you roughly on time to the end. I appreciate your listening or napping or whatever you were doing. And if we can be of any service in the future, you can always contact us because we'll be contacting you for help down the road. Thank you very much. in
Awesome,
this.
awesome. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think a lot of us that work in food safety deal with a lot of it's very nebulous, like oh, you telling somebody who owns a restaurant, you could get somebody sick, you could give somebody salmonella. So it's definitely interesting to see that from the other side, from your side. We do have a couple of questions if you have time to answer some of them.
Sure.
Awesome.
Let me know what you want.
So the first question that we have here is, are you following the food freedom bills around the country? What do you anticipate will be some of the implications?
I don't think there are any significant implications. I don't think that's going to have a lot of traction. And the things that I'm really interested in, legislatures are not doing much about. If you just looked at FSMA, for instance, which was an important piece of federal legislation, but is woefully underfunded and understaffed. We know what to do, but we don't spend the money to do it.
Absolutely. Let's see. The next question is, are there any recommendations you have for inspectors regarding documentation on inspection forms?
Just a document. Sometimes they're asked, can we be sued or are we responsible for mistakes? And the answer is no. The only case I can think of where an inspector had not personal liability but for the public health entity was giving misinformation, in that case about Vibrio and signage that was required. They simply gave the wrong information. The case said that that caused him to eat raw oysters. Probably wasn't true. But the documentation piece is hugely important because the more information, the better.
I definitely agree. Let's say, what is your perspective on the new FDA traceability rule?
We, as I alluded to earlier, we have a long way to go on traceability. It is proved to be, I thought we would be much further along. I thought FSMA might really move the ball. FDA has a lot of good ideas. It comes down to money and industry compliance. The most important things that have changed, for instance, in the leafy green industry, are the California leafy green industry itself self-policing because they get tired of being sued for romaine and other leafy green outbreaks. And so they impose upon themselves requirements that change. There's so much pushback in our country about top-down regulation. If the feds try to tell you to do something, there's always pushback. I always tell businesses, at least at the state and local level, reach out to public health, get their input. They're there to help you, not to fight with you. So we'll see on traceability. I'll believe it when I see it, but I do have hopes for AI then.
Could be interesting. Let's see. Somebody asks if you could please run for president.
Yeah, I'll get on that.
Is Marler Clark ever retained to represent firms or farms, or do you only bring litigation against them?
We only bring litigation against them. However, I did defense work, and we share information with anybody who will come forward. In fact, we had a gal here who was a paralegal, went to law school, is now working as a lawyer in Seattle. Her family has a significant agricultural business in California and Florida. And that was always the sort of discovery we had to make sure there were no conflicts there. But there's so many people to represent. We're never short of business.
All right. And then the last question is is this presentation available so that they can send it to their director?
I hope so, because if there's anything we could do, just specifically on kids and animals, that would be a big step forward. I'll tell you straight up, I don't have any grandchildren yet, but if I did, I would not take them to an animal exhibit, at least under the age of 5, period. No discussion, not even think about it.
And then also just with regards to that one, the entire presentation will be posted online to our website, but that'll be later on this month. So you can, if you're interested, you can send the entire block of presentations to your director. But otherwise, that's wraps up the questions for you again, Mr. Clark. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time and giving such a great presentation.
Well, I appreciate you guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too.